Hello and welcome to the Dallas-Fort Worth Perl Mongers user group meeting for March 2016. Today we're not going to have a presentation, nothing of that regard. We're just meeting as friends and members here at the Dallas Makerspace to talk about the direction that we're going to take in future meetings in the coming months, things that have happened in Perl recently, Perl news, and basically take it from there. So we'll see how that goes. The idea right now is not to have a structured meeting, but to talk about the structured meetings that we're going to have next month, the month following, and so on and so forth. But we want to talk about who we want to hear it from. I have sent out some invitations, fellows here who are in the classroom with me, to some folks near and far, as far away as on the other side of the Atlantic, to do meeting presentations with us. So one being Gabor Sabo, and forgive me if I said that wrong, Gabor, I apologize. And another guy being William down in Austin, who's doing work on our Perl. Our Perl had a release this last February, so it's kind of Perl news. Has anybody heard of our Perl?
Our Perl?
Our Perl.
No.
Okay. Our Perl, when we did the hackathon in 2013, winter, so about 2014 when we did the last big hackathon, there was one guy who wanted to use our Perl to make things go faster. It turns out that a pure Perl solution went the fastest. Well, I can't say it was pure Perl because it used Moose. So there were some compiled, excess. There was some compiled excess code involved, but it was a Perl-based solution. And our Perl, well, let's look at what our Perl website says. So I'm going to switch to the screen share. And okay, forgive me. See if I can switch over quickly. Okay, our Perl. I was doing a little bit of reading about this before. So our Perl version 1.6 came out. It's kind of cool. R stands for Roadrunner. Among one, it can stand for Roadrunner. Basically, it's just really fast Perl. If you go to the website, it says you found the official internet home of our Perl, the optimizing compiler for Perl 5. Our Perl allows your low magic Perl 5 software to be compiled into ultra fast, fully compatible C++. Compatible with what, I don't know. If this is your first visit, click the FAQ, which I did. So on Valentine's Day, they released the last major release, and while it seems like it has a single maintainer, William, it does have traction. I know because I know there are people who are using it. I find that it's interesting, the idea that you can take some Perl, cool, as long as it's not high magic Perl doing clever and fancy things, we can compile that into C++, shove that in a compiler, run that. And if you look at the FAQ, it talks about what you get from that. It's easier for me to just kind of summarize what I read here than it is to explain it and mess it up. So our Perl, he kind of talks about the cloud. So normal computer users will like running our Perl compiled apps because the software will run hundreds of times faster than Perl interpreted apps. Our Perl version 2, which has not come out yet, will further empower them to take full advantage of all the shiny new multi-core processor and cloud accounts. Kind of nebulous, no pun intended. Software developers will like programming in RPerl because it will provide superior serial performance. And RPerl 2 will automatically parallelize their applications to be compatible with the current, future high-performance computing platforms. I'm not sure if I want somebody to automatically parallelize my code. I kind of think if I wanted to parallelize my code, I would want to be the one to do it. And I would want to see how it happened. But be that as it may, cool. It says hundreds of times faster. So I'd like to see it. Perl is already really fast. Now, one of the things, if you continue to read down through the FAQ, ask questions like, why should I care about RPerl? What's wrong with Perl? You know, the response is that Perl is slow. RPerl can do it way faster. Let me give you an example of something that I did in the past that Perl really did not do quickly. When I was in college, my professor, and this is granted, this was way back in like 2006 when Google wasn't really prevalent, and our professor said, all right, whoever can bring me the biggest prime, is going to get the prize. You can have an A+, whatever. So it was it was a math professor, and what's the biggest prime that you can find, the prime number. And so I'm like, hey, we can do this with Perl, So I wrote a loop that just basically went for 0 through whatever, or while loop it might have been. I put up the post on pearlmonks.org, and basically for every number I wanted to see if it was divisible by 2, because if it was divisible by 2, then it wasn't a prime. And if it was divisible by basically anything that is divisible by anything other than itself is not a prime number. Why are primes important? Cryptography. Yes, cryptography. So I started doing this thinking, man, I've got a whole 512 megabytes of RAM in this computer, and pretty new processor. I should be able to calculate a really big prime really fast. I didn't know at that point that people had already been trying to figure out primes since the 1940s. Big primes. And that's why I posted that question to Perl Monks. And there was an explosion. There was like a nerd explosion on this website. And of all the posts that I've had of things that are much more interesting to me, practical problems and questions about finding things in irregular expressions and text patterns, this by far had the most upvotes. Perl Monks gave that like a ridiculously high score, and you can still go and find it. Just Google finding primes Tommy Perl Monks, and you'll see that. But Perl just got slow and slow and slow. And when I said, guys, what's going on? How can I make Perl do this better? The community hacked together a few things. They tried this, but the prevalent answer was, can't do it. Can't really do it with Perl. If you want to do some serious hardcore number crunching like this, you need to go down to C or assembler. And people, by the way, new guy, people have been trying to compute primes for a long time, and we have some really, really big computers doing these calculations already in grid computing and supercomputing and clustered computing. So your little computer, Tommy, is not going to be able to figure out those primes nearly as well or as quickly. So the answer, Google it, and you'll find a big prime. And I did, and I won because I used Google. I got the biggest prime and gave it to the teacher because I used Google. But in my defense, I probably went to more effort than anybody else in the class did. I wrote a program. But there are some things that Perl cannot do fast. I learned that when I wrote that application. There are other things that Perl can do really fast when you're not dealing with like real-time stuff. or if you're dealing with something that is just as fast as it will ever go, no matter what language you write it in, and you write it in Perl, after Perl is initialized and it's running that code, you're running, bytecode. So very, very fast, not slow. I'm interested in seeing what our Perl can do, and I asked William if he would do a demo for our group next month or the month following, and I asked Gabor as well if he would do a remote hangout with us. I thought that would be cool. Gabor and Perl Maven, he's always got some great stuff. Have you guys ever been to pearlmaven.com? He's got some courseware if you want to learn Perl, and he's also constantly adding some cool tutorials and whatnot. And I think it'd be lots of fun to pick his brain, and or else to just let him do a presentation. And I also wanted to let you guys know that it was my intention for the next few months to continue to invite people to come and talk with us. And do presentations both for their, getting exposure for their project, and so that we can look at some cool stuff as well. I mean, I can show you the stuff that I do only for so many times before it's boring. I mean, I'm not, well, I mean, the stuff that I do is really cool the first time. It's really great. But there are other people who are doing other things that are also awesome, and John Dexter, you gave us a really awesome Docker presentation that I really enjoyed. I still go and look at that from time to time for Docker Compose. Yeah, it has changed a lot since then. Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it's time for another presentation. I second that. The landscape has changed a lot in recent years. We're talking about things like cloud computing a lot more, and it's kind of like a really annoying thing anytime somebody says cloud. It's just like, shut up with the cloud, cloud head. But then there are other times when it's there's legitimate use for the term. Hey, we're actually building a cloud, where I work, for example. No, not me, but I'm saying, there are places where I have worked, and I'm sure places where I will, where people are deploying private clouds. And there actually is such a thing as, clouds. We do have cloud computing. Amazon cloud, we've got Google cloud, everything's a cloud.
I can paraphrase.
I say what?
I can paraphrase. That's about your damn cloud.
So yeah, it is going to be interesting as the landscape changes to see what cloud computing can do for us. When I was in college, at the same time that I was trying to come up with a really big prime number, I was experimenting with a stack of servers in my apartment. It was just a one-room apartment back then, and I had conned this guy into letting me borrow 9 Supermicro servers from him because, well, I know I'm like that. Con, strong word. He's still a dear friend, and we talk about things, business things together. But he, ran a server business, let me borrow the servers, and so I started running Linux on them and clustering these things. And at the time, if you wanted to build a cluster, it really didn't mean a lot of things. Now, when people ask you if you want to build a cluster, do you know about clusters? Well, my response to that is, well, clusters of what? Because you can cluster almost anything now. Back then, if you want, we're talking about cluster computing, that was the cloud back then. It was cluster. You cluster? You know about clustering? You knew clustering. That was like being the guy with the cloud badge. I'm cloud certified. I've got a cloud. We need to come up with a cloud certification training course. But so yes, I started making this cluster, and the cool thing then was MPIO, or message passing IO, and this guy named Moshe, or M-O-C-H-E, still don't know how to pronounce the name. He developed MPIO, And you can still use it on Raspberry Pi now, and you can use this cool stuff. Um, but the message passing I/O was all network based and the grid computing, and it was almost like MapReduce, where you would reduce things into smaller jobs, send them out to your worker bees, and then collect the results from everybody after everybody was done. Anyhow, so what do you guys think about
Cloud,
what do you guys think about our Perl, for example? I mean, it sounds fascinating to me.
so if you turn it into C code and compiling it, that means you don't need the Perl runtime.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
I think so.
As opposed to taking the making a small thing or something.
Mm-hmm.
Still needing a compatible Perl on the target system. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But performance, yeah, I would need more info about what is fast.
Right. Exactly what are we trying to accomplish that Perl is so slow in doing? There's some things like Perl hashes, the data structure. It's not a native C, data type. Pretty much everything in Perl is not, but it's based on C data types. And based on what I'm reading here in the FAQ, and after that you can go and read the low magic Perl commandments. There's a page here called "Thou shalt" and "Thou shalt not," and gives a list of things to do. If you want to write low magic Perl, I'm just going to give you a summary. He's basically saying use best practices. Don't do things that are, cryptic. Don't write really long one-liners. Don't use experimental features. Use only production features. If there's something that you could have written in, how some people play Perl golf, say, well, I can do that. And, that's great that you wrote that in 5 lines, but I can write that in 3 characters. Thou shalt not is where the category that falls under is thou shalt not. And don't get clever. If there's something that isn't, it says non-PBP code. I'm guessing that's, Perl best practice or play-by-play. Both, translate to me as like very visible, readable, maintainable. Somebody can come in behind you and work with it. That kind of thing. And I'm excited about giving it a try until I get down to the bottom. And you're supposed to have 10 commandments. Well, there's 63 here. 63 commandments. The last 2, thou shalt use low magic object orientation, less references to hash fields or restricted hash, or and then thou shalt not use high magic OO. No mop, moves, mouse, move, etc. So you lost me there. I love moves, and the stuff that moves lets me do. So he lost me there, but in a sense, like there's some code that I wrote that's just Perl, pure Perl, on purpose, has no dependencies outside of Perl, requires no other modules except for modules that are part of Perl core, has no XS code, doesn't depend on modules that have XS code on purpose, and it uses object orientation in Perl that is not fancy. In other words, no moves. And it's done that way so that you can pick it up and use it on anything. You can use it on an Android device. Recently I found out some people are using some of my Perl code in BusyBox. So if you ever rooted your phone, you might be running some of my code.
Cool. Right.
But it's there's a reason to write code like that, and it's very helpful when you need to do that. And there's also substantially more use cases where you're going to need something that's robust and easy, and you don't want to handcraft everything from bits. In that regard, it's nice to be able to use something like a framework. If you look at Perl Weekly, what's happened in the last week, in the last couple weeks or whatever, there's an article that's been published that got Board linked to. Frameworks don't make much sense. It's the opinion of Peter, or it looks like Peter, but it's Peter with an IS at the end. He goes on to opine that using a framework is not cool. It's not to be preferred because, well, in his words, they're hard to learn. They limit your creativity. They increase your project's complexities and dependencies. They go out of business and get abandoned. You have to maintain and upgrade your code to match the latest framework versions for no reason, or for no good reason. You have to search for help and ask others for advice when you're stuck, and you probably only need a small percentage of the features that the framework offers anyway. They just don't make sense. Well, I can see that those points are all true, but I do enjoy using framework like for web development. I really like being able to use stuff like Mojo and Catalyst because these people are doing awesome stuff, really good stuff. I mean, chime in. I don't want to be the only person who's talking in the meeting. Well, you're over there shaking your head.
So, it's a particular approach to a generic, generalized issue, right? So, Mojolicious, as a framework, it helps you build websites, and the first iteration of that, you're using just a little bit of the framework, and then as you iterate on it, you grow the site, you use more of the framework and more of the framework and more of the framework. So, if you've got a very well defined application and it's got a need for portability, he has a point. If you're just building something, you don't know exactly where it's going to go because you're working for somebody else who hasn't defined it for you, but you know where it's going to get deployed, or you can specify where it's going to get deployed, his argument makes zero sense. So it's just opinion, and that's the beauty of open source. He can put code, behind it. He can put his money where his mouth is, and that's great, and we'll benefit from that if that's what our need is, right? And then otherwise, he hasn't hurt anybody by pushing the thing.
Yeah, I don't have a problem using frameworks that make things go, really quickly for me. They're already lightweight, very debug. That way I don't have to write something from scratch.
Yeah, feature rich is not bad.
Yeah, one of the things, this is interesting, you make an interesting point. You want to, for example, I have a module in a CPAN that some people say is fat. Some people say it's too big, there's too much code in that. Well, because of that, somebody went off and made something : tiny that has several similar features of the stuff that I do, but after a couple years of work on said module, you can go back and it has more code than mine does. And it has a heck of a lot more dependencies, and they're all magic. So I don't know what to say about it. You want to be able to include a lot of features, but at the same time, well, if I expose that feature, then I'm going to need to include another module to give that to my end user. Or if I implement that functionality, it means more code, and so my code footprint grows. And me already knowing that, out of the library API calls that I let people have if they use that interface, I know that they're probably not going to use them all. So what I do is I've tucked them away into separate modules that get loaded on demand. And if and only if those things are needed, then they get pulled in at runtime, so that the compile time footprint and memory footprint is very, we're talking microscopic, very small, very small. The majority of my code is documentation, and after that, error messages. Very verbose, helpful error messages that help you debug things if you get in a pinch. The actual code itself isn't that big. So if you want to be able to help people and give them a lot of features, you do end up implementing something that's more weighty. You do. So you're either going to have to bite the bullet or optimize. You know, I try to optimize things away so that code doesn't get loaded unless it's needed. But for frameworks, is there really that much better? I'd be interested in just writing a quick little Mojo app, seeing how much RAM it actually needed per request.
Not a whole lot. I don't know. I would say working code wins.
Working code wins.
Because he wants to build a thing, we've got another thing, they can both, like, everyone can get to do it first, your way. Yeah.
I see it. I can understand his point a little bit because I wrote a lot of code many years ago that was based on CGI.pm. And it was Perl code that was based on Common Gateway Interface. Ran out of Apache, Apache served up Perl process code, and the output goes to the user's browser. It was stateless. Used DBI, and at max, a single page view might have used 3 database connections, to run a query. I mean, we're not talking rocket science, but those days are gone, and we've moved on to bigger things. Now, I don't know if let's see. Let's say we make a Mojolicious app with user authentication and session management, and you tie session management to the database. How many database hits are you going to be looking at per page view? More. That is the answer. More. Substantially more. Substantially more per page view. You're going to be looking at a lot more. And now we have, let's say we go with Mojo, and something new comes out. Then what happens? What does happen when the Mojolicious maintainers stop maintaining Mojo? If you do need it, We were talking with a guy who wandered into our class who was complaining that Microsoft abandoned the framework that he was using to develop applications. And he was like, oh man, at that point I went to open source because they abandoned my framework, and they said it's end of life.
Well, that's the difference between being able to and wanting to. Right? With open source you can, but the learning curve is steep if you weren't a maintainer of it. If it's got any level of complexity, there is a curve you've got to climb, a mountain. So that code well enough that you can change it, right? Period. Anything. And the Mojolicious code that I've seen is very tight. It's written in a very terse style, and you really got to know what's going on. You got to know how the variables are getting interpolated under the hood to understand what it is you're looking at. Right? So you got to have extra knowledge to even do that. Now, yes, you can. It doesn't stop you. All that being said, whereas with Microsoft, you don't have the source code, you don't have the intellectual property, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So can versus want.
Now, is it a problem if I say I want to throw my chips in with Mojolicious and build an app, and there's going to be business critical functionality here serving my company or customer, and a few years down the road we move to something new and better? Is that really advice? I don't think so. I think using what's good.
I think the closest thing to what you're talking about would be with Mojolicious, the maintainer got um, disillusioned with the direction of Mongo, and so he had a very tightly coupled uh, database layer, ORM thingy called Mango, which talked to Mongo, and it was pure, Mojo-licious style, right? But he was like, I gotta give up because I can't keep track of the way Mongo guys are changing basically their API, their access. The way they have architected accessing the service is changing, and it's changing in such a way that it's stupid. So I am no longer going to maintain Mango. It's frozen. And instead, they wrote a custom wrapper for Postgres, because Postgres was not iterating in the new versions and not changing everything willy-nilly. So if you were really, really invested in Mongo, if the functionality you needed was there, great. If you needed something new and else, there's your choice. Switch to something else, downgrade from the really tightly coupled, DBI thing, or pick it up and run with it yourself. And most of us that have jobs which are deploying stuff, it's actually going to be easier to stop using Mongo and start using Postgres if we've got control of it, right? So it's not even that your framework changed, it's that the database that you want to use with your framework became less support, right? And that was just last year, right? Last year.
I think
early last year.
David Golden works for Mongo. There's a lot of stuff with Mongo. I see his name next to Mongo and Mongo next to his name a lot. Yeah. If on it, he's connected to me on LinkedIn, and I saw on his profile that he's working for Mongo.
But you can still use a straight DBI connection because it's still Perl, right? And there's probably a DBI for Mongo, but it's not quite the same. It's not quite as really tightly integrated. Right. So.
It's interesting how these topics dovetail into one another. Switching back to our Perl, for example, in the FAQ, talked about some similar concerns. What's wrong with Perl and what's wrong with Magic and what is Magic. Let's see if I can. Okay, what is Magic? Perl was made to make hard things easy. To achieve this, quite a lot of complexity was built into the Perl core. You were just saying something similar about Mojo. Mojo goes above and beyond, does some really cool stuff down deep inside, kind of magic. Complexity built into Perl core and hidden from software developers who program in Perl to create applications. This hidden complexity in Perl is literally called magic in the Perl core source code. In addition, magic can further refer to any of the weird, wacky, or especially complicated features of Perl. Why is magic not always a good thing? During a quarter century of Perl's existence, more and more magic has been added to make Perl more and more powerful. The cumulative effect of piling magic on magic on magic is that the Perl 5 core is now unmanageably complex. Shot across the bow. Perl 5 is unmanageably complex, he says. Only a handful of professional core Perl developers can even make minor changes without breaking everyone's existing Perl application. This is known as the need to maintain bug-for-bug backward compatibility. Also, all the magic has made Perl 5 run very, very slow for non-magic applications, which will run fast in all other popular programming languages. So basically, magic makes Perl incredibly powerful, but also slow and unmanageable in the long term. I'm reading this, hearing things that we're talking about in 3 other side discussions about APIs, about frameworks, magic, maintainers, jumping ship, that, maintainers of frameworks going out of business. Is it better to be magic? Is it better to have less magic? Do what I mean, Perl, so on and so forth. But this, I'm not seeing where Perl runs really, really slow. Also, all the magic has made Perl 5 run very, very slow, to quote him again, for non-magic applications, which run fast in all other popular programming languages. I think this is a bit of a stretch. So that's why that's one of the reasons why I asked William to come and explain and do a demo for us. Sometimes they say the proof's in the pudding. The guy who put in a submission for the use of RPerl in the hackathon lost. His solution did not run very quickly. But what was the use case? It was deduping a file system. And we're not doing real-time number crunching. You can only go as fast as your file system goes. And even on an SSD, even on an array of SSDs, that's still not as fast as computing numbers, in CPU cache, for example. Different use cases. I really want to see what RPerl can do, and it'd be nifty if like when you go to Mojo. Go to mojolicious.org. They've got this nice user-friendly little website here with some how do you use it right out of the box. Just run this command here, run this command here, and you are running a Mojolicious app. I don't have anything like that with RPerl. I'd love to use RPerl. Will you show me how to do it? Install it and run RPerl. Look at the RPerl command documentation. What do we have here? Link to CPAN. With some switches. I'd like to know, people have wanted to know for a real long time, how can I compile Perl source code and distribute a binary that nobody can crack open and read? And, in the spirit of open source, everybody who loves Perl says, down with that person. Well, Perl 2 EXE filled that niche for many years, and you can still use ParPacker to create even SUID binaries. If you go to atrixnet.com, you can see an example. I wrote a blog post about how to do that. You can literally encrypt and bleach, or bleach and encrypt your source code in Perl, and then compile that in a ParPacker application, and then ship that around. And you have a compiled application at that point, but you're not solving the speed problem that RPerl wants to solve. You're solving the problem of I want to protect my source code from other people's eyes. So RPerl is interesting to me because I can create binaries that are opaque, nobody can see in them. But what really can it speed up? In other Perl news, what has hit the CPAN since the beginning of March? If you go to metacpan.org and look at recent uploads, about 1,000 stable distributions have been uploaded to CPAN since the beginning of March. So CPAN is hopping. And that doesn't count what they call trial disks, like the one I uploaded recently to fix a bug. Those, I'm not seeing those here. This one, nope. I don't think this is including the trial disk because mine doesn't show up here when I uploaded it. But CPAN's alive and hopping. I thought maybe I would say, hey, look, let's look at what's been uploaded to CPAN in the last few days. But there's no point. A more relevant question would be, what's been uploaded to the CPAN in the last 5 minutes? Literally. Let's see. So yeah, in the last 30 minutes, while we were having this meeting, we've already had 4 distributions uploaded to the CPAN. In other news, have you guys heard about the QA hackathon? What's going on with Pearl? Anybody?
I think I've read the stories about it. Weekly.
Well, there is a link to that. Let's see. ZipRecruiter sponsoring the QA hackathon. As a CPAN author, I got contacted and asked, hey, notice that you have a few distributions on CPAN. Want some help? Do you want to participate in the hackathon? Reply yes or no to let us know if you're in. And if you are, then people will start sending you pull requests to fix the bugs in your stuff. So I thought that's kind of cool. It's a big, what do you call that? House cleaning effort on the part of a lot of good people to help fix problems that are out there. What'd you see? Some of them you'll recognize. Prue, Shank, Merlin. We know Merlin. MJD, Mark Jason Dominus. I submitted a patch to him years ago. Spasm, D. Farrell, Bluefeet. ZipRecruiter continues to be built on open source, which is why they support developer communities through CPAN contributions, hosting la.pm.org meetings, and financial support for events like the QA Hackathon. So if you want to check that out, just go to just Google Perl Weekly or go to pearlweekly.com. You can take a look at this news. Also, interesting news. Yes, Strawberry Pearl had a recent release, 2 of them, fixing bugs in 5.22 and 5.20, and there is a call for grant proposals. I think that's, deadline March 23rd. So if you have a Perl project, you've got a Perl project, and you think that it's awesome, you can go to the Perl Foundation and say, I'd like a grant. This is my idea. This is what I'm doing. And they will pay you to do it. They'll give you a grant if your idea doesn't stink. And, this is, high level. But basically, you can get paid to do awesome stuff. And the Perl Foundation will fund it. I think that's awesome. I just don't think that there's a grant big enough for me. Well, I don't think they hand out really big grants. I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out. But I don't think that... I'm just saying I'm not quitting my day job to work on a Perl grant. But the idea is sound. I applaud them. They do this every year, and I think it's really cool that they're funding awesome ideas. They're literally putting their money behind open source. Loving that.
I just sent your chat.
You sent something? Oh, I have to turn off screen sharing. Let's see. So we have a chat question. Okay, John Fields sent in a link. You'll have to, let's see if I can, can you still see my screen if I, like this? Can you see this? Here. John says go here. And it looks like this. St. Dogbert enters the land of cubicles, searching for the demons of stupidity. St. Dogbert now? He's a saint. Suddenly he finds an over-promoted computer guru spouting useless database concepts. You'd be fools to ignore the Boolean anti-binary least square approach. We've never worked with anybody like that before. Nobody's ever worked with anybody like that. The monster is dispatched to the dark world by the sight of its most feared object. Look, actual code! Cool. Actual code.
Working code wins.
Working code wins. Working code wins. Well, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and put a bow on the broadcast. We'd love to have you guys who are watching come out and join us. You can send us emails or reply on our Google Plus profile or to our Google Plus posts about meetings so that you can participate in meetings with us, be a presenter, talk, give a talk, what have you. I'm going to I'm going to send invitations to folks to give talks to us as well here if you guys are interested. I'm keenly interested in seeing what you have to say about Docker, John, Dexter, you know, that stuff. Watch our mailing list. If you go to dfw.pm.org, see a link to our mailing list. Watch our mailing list for the announcement, invitation for speakers. Thanks for playing.